Have you ever judged someone based on their appearance and instantly regretted it? Have you ever witnessed a moment so profound that it completely shattered everything you thought you knew about humanity, dignity, and the masks we all wear? Well, let me tell you about the day that changed my entire perspective on life. The day when a dirty, disheveled child walked into the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan and taught me the most valuable lesson I would ever learn. My name is Sarah, and I've been working as a server at Le Jardin Doré for almost 7 years now. This isn't just any restaurant, mind you. This is the kind of place where reservations are made 6 months in advance, where a single meal can cost more than most people's monthly rent, where celebrities, politicians, and billionaires come to see and be seen. The chandeliers hanging from our ceilings cost more than my college education, and the wine list reads like a history book of the world's finest vineyards. I thought I had seen everything in my years there. I had served royalty, Academy Award winners, tech moguls, and more arrogant wealthy people than I could count. I had witnessed proposals, business deals worth millions, and even a few dramatic breakups that would make great television. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on that rainy Tuesday evening in October. It was around 7:30 in the evening, right in the middle of our dinner rush. The restaurant was buzzing with the usual energy, that particular hum of expensive conversations clinking crystal, and the soft notes of live piano music floating through the air. I was tending to table 12, a group of investment bankers celebrating some lucrative deal, when I heard it. The sound. It started as a gasp, then rippled through the room like a wave, conversations halting mid-sentence, forks freezing halfway to mouths. I turned toward the entrance, and that's when I saw him. A boy, couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old, standing in the doorway of our pristine establishment. But it wasn't just any boy. This child was covered, and I mean absolutely covered, in dirt. His clothes, which might have once been jeans and a t-shirt, were so filthy they looked like they'd been dragged through every gutter in New York City. His face was smudged with grime, his hair matted and sticking up in odd directions, and his sneakers, if you could even call them that anymore, were falling apart at the seams. Mud caked his hands, and there were streaks of something dark, maybe oil or more dirt, running down his arms. The smell that began to waft through our meticulously climate-controlled, lavender-scented dining room was unmistakable. It was the smell of the streets, of unwashed clothes, of poverty and neglect. I watched as our maitre d', Marcus, a man who prided himself on his impeccable composure and had worked in 5-star establishments for over 30 years, visibly recoiled. His face, usually a mask of professional courtesy, contorted into an expression of barely concealed disgust. The boy stood there, his eyes wide and uncertain, taking in the opulent surroundings. I could see him trembling slightly, whether from cold, fear, or something else entirely. I couldn't tell. He looked so small standing there, so utterly out of place among the silk dresses, tailored suits, and glittering jewelry. Around me, I could feel the atmosphere shift dramatically. The investment bankers at my table exchanged looks of disbelief and annoyance. A woman 2 tables over actually clutched her Hermes purse closer to her body, as if this child might contaminate it from across the room. Another guest, a regular who always ordered the most expensive items on the menu just to show off, made an exaggerated show of covering his nose with his napkin. The whispers started almost immediately, hissing through the room like poison. How did he get in here? Someone needs to call security. This is absolutely unacceptable. I paid $1,500 for this meal and this is what I have to look at? Where are his parents? He's probably homeless. Get him out of here before he steals something. Each comment felt like a small knife, cutting through whatever illusion of sophistication and class I had built up about this place and the people who frequented it. I felt my stomach twist with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. Pity, certainly, but also shame. Shame for every time I had made assumptions about someone based on how they looked. Shame for working in a place that catered to people who could so easily dismiss a child's humanity. Marcus approached the boy, his movements stiff and formal, his voice low but carrying enough for those nearest to hear. "Young man, I'm afraid there's been some mistake. This establishment requires proper attire and reservations. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The boy didn't move. He just stood there looking up at Marcus with those wide eyes. Then, in a voice that was surprisingly steady despite the trembling of his small frame, he spoke. "I need to speak to the owner. It's important." The audacity of this statement sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the crowd. Several people laughed. Actual laughter, as if the idea of this dirty street child needing to speak to the owner of Le Jardin Doré was the most absurd thing they had ever heard. Marcus's expression hardened. "That's not possible. You need to leave now or I'll have security escort you out." I found myself moving forward, my feet carrying me toward the scene before my brain had fully processed the decision. Something about the boy's eyes stopped me. They weren't the eyes of a troublemaker or a lost child. There was a determination there, a fierce intelligence that seemed far beyond his years, and something else too. A deep, profound sadness that made my heart ache in ways I couldn't explain. "Wait," I heard myself say, my voice cutting through the hostile atmosphere. The word came out stronger than I intended, and suddenly several pairs of eyes were on me, including Marcus's disapproving glare. I was stepping way outside my role as a server, potentially jeopardizing my job, but something in me couldn't just stand by and watch this child be humiliated and thrown out like garbage. "What's your name?" I asked the boy, kneeling down to his level, ignoring the fact that my expensive uniform would probably need dry cleaning after this. My colleagues would later tell me I was crazy for getting so close to him, for risking the wrath of our wealthy clientele, but in that moment none of that mattered. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw tears beginning to form in the corners of his eyes. "My name is Charlie," he said softly, "and I really need to speak to Mr. Beaumont. It's about my dad." The mention of Richard Beaumont, our owner, caused another stir. Mr. Beaumont was a legendary figure in New York's restaurant scene, a man who had built an empire of fine dining establishments and was notoriously private and selective about who he granted audiences with. The idea that this child knew his name and was asking for him specifically was shocking to everyone present. Marcus was already reaching for his phone, undoubtedly to call security, when Charlie did something that would change everything. With hands that shook so badly I wondered how he managed it, he reached into the pocket of his filthy jeans and pulled out a small, weathered leather wallet. It was falling apart, held together by what looked like duct tape and hope. He fumbled with it for a moment, his small fingers struggling with the clasp, and then he pulled out something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a check, a personal check, printed on expensive cream-colored paper that I recognized immediately because I had seen Mr. Beaumont sign similar checks before, when settling accounts with our premium suppliers. But it wasn't the check itself that made the room fall into absolute silence. It was what was written on it. The amount was blank, but in the signature line, in the distinctive flowing script that anyone who worked at Le Jardin Doré would recognize instantly, was Richard Beaumont's signature. And in the memo line, in that same unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words that made my blood run cold. "For my son, Charlie." The silence that fell over the restaurant was deafening, so complete that I could hear the soft patter of rain against the windows and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Every single person in that dining room was staring at the check in Charlie's trembling hands, and I watched as the reality of the situation began to dawn on faces that had moments before been twisted with disgust and contempt. Marcus's face had gone completely white, all the blood draining from his features as he stared at that signature. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The woman who had clutched her purse was now frozen with her hand still gripping it, her eyes wide with horror at her own behavior. The investment bankers at my table had stopped their celebration entirely, looking at each other with expressions that mixed shame and fear. I felt like I couldn't breathe as I looked at the check, then back at Charlie, then at the check again. Richard Beaumont had a son? In all my years working here, I had never heard him mention a child. Mr. Beaumont was an intensely private man, yes, but surely someone would have known. Someone would have said something. Unless this was a secret he had kept deliberately, for reasons I couldn't begin to imagine. "Charlie," I said gently, my voice barely above a whisper, "why are you here? Where are your parents?" His lower lip began to tremble, and the tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his cheeks. "My mom died 3 years ago," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "And my dad is sick, really sick. He's in the hospital right now. And he told me that if anything ever happened to him, if he ever couldn't take care of me anymore, I should come here. He said to find Mr. Beaumont. He said to tell him that James sent me." The name hit me like a physical blow. James Keller. I knew that name. Everyone who worked at Le Jardin Doré knew that name, though it was spoken rarely and always in hushed, respectful tones. James Keller had been Richard Beaumont's business partner when Le Jardin Doré first opened 25 years ago. He had been more than a business partner, actually. From what I had pieced together from overheard conversations and old photographs that still hung in Mr. Beaumont's private office, James had been his best friend, his brother in all but blood. They had dreamed of this restaurant together, had poured their hearts and souls into making it what it was today. But 15 years ago, James had left. There had been some kind of falling out, a disagreement so severe that James had walked away from everything they had built together, signing over his share of the business to Richard and disappearing from New York entirely. Mr. Beaumont never spoke about it, and anyone who had been around long enough to remember knew better than to ask. The pain of that severed friendship still lingered in Mr. Beaumont's eyes whenever anyone was foolish enough to mention James's name. And now here was this boy, this dirty, frightened, heartbroken boy, claiming to be James's son, standing in the middle of our dining room holding a check that proved Richard Beaumont had known about him all along. The implications were staggering, spinning through my mind faster than I could process them. Had they reconciled at some point? Had Mr. Beaumont been secretly supporting them? Why was Charlie in this condition if he had access to the resources that check implied? What had happened to James? Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and uncertain. I need to call Mr. Beaumont immediately. Charlie, the boy, please wait right here, don't move. But Charlie wasn't looking at Marcus anymore. He was looking at me, his eyes pleading and desperate. My dad is dying, he said, and the raw pain in his voice made something inside my chest crack wide open. The doctor said he only has a few days left, maybe less. He made me promise to come here, to find Mr. Beaumont, to give him this check and tell him that he was sorry. For everything. For the fight. For leaving. For being too proud to reach out sooner. My dad said Mr. Beaumont was the best man he ever knew, and that if anyone could take care of me, it would be him. He said to tell him that the restaurant was always his dream, not my dad's, and that he never stopped thinking about him as a brother. I watched as Charlie's small body began to shake with sobs, all the bravery and determination that had carried him here finally crumbling under the weight of his grief and fear. This child, this brave, remarkable child, had somehow made his way across the city, probably navigating buses and subways and who knows what else, filthy and alone and terrified, because his dying father had asked him to, and we had almost thrown him out like trash. We had judged him, mocked him, treated him like he was less than human, all because of how he looked. I pulled Charlie into my arms without thinking, not caring about my uniform, not caring about the stairs, not caring about anything except this child who was breaking apart in front of me. He clung to me like a drowning person clings to a life raft, his tears soaking into my shoulder, his small body racked with sobs that seemed too big for someone so young to contain. Around us, the restaurant remained frozen in shocked silence. I could see guilt and shame written across so many faces now. People who had laughed at him, sneered at him, wanted him gone. How many of them were parents themselves? How many of them had children they loved, children they would do anything to protect? And yet they had been willing to cast this child out into the street without a second thought, all because he didn't meet their standards of acceptability. Have you ever been through something that made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself? Comment below, because this moment, holding this sobbing child while surrounded by people who had revealed the ugliest parts of their humanity, was mine. Marcus was on his phone now, speaking in urgent hushed tones, and I could tell from his expression that he had reached Mr. Beaumont and was explaining the situation. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the maitre d's face cycling through emotions, fear, anxiety, relief, more fear. When he hung up, he looked at me and Charlie, and there was something different in his expression now, something that might have been respect, or maybe just recognition of his own terrible mistake. Mr. Beaumont is on his way, Marcus said, his voice much gentler than before. He said he'll be here in 10 minutes. He said to take care of Charlie, to get him whatever he needs to make him comfortable. And he said, his voice dropped even lower, he said to tell Charlie that Uncle Richard is coming and that everything is going to be okay. Uncle Richard. The words hung in the air, confirmation of a relationship that went deeper than business, deeper than friendship. Richard Beaumont had known about Charlie all along. He had stayed connected somehow, had given James that check as a promise, a safety net, a bridge across whatever divide had separated them. And James, dying in a hospital bed somewhere in this vast city, had trusted that Richard would honor that promise, would take care of his son when he no longer could. I felt Charlie's grip on me tighten when he heard Marcus's words, hope and fear and grief all tangled together in the way his small hands clutched at my uniform. "Is he really coming?" he whispered against my shoulder. "Is Uncle Richard really coming?" "Yes, sweetheart," I told him, my own voice thick with emotion. "He's really coming. And he's going to take care of you. I promise." The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity, and an instant all at once. Marcus, to his credit, immediately shifted into action, clearing a private booth and sending another server to get hot chocolate and food for Charlie. The other staff members, who had been standing frozen in shock, suddenly found their voices and their purpose, though I noticed how many of them avoided looking directly at the boy, shame written clearly across their features. The guests in the dining room began to slowly resume their meals, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Conversations were more subdued, and I caught more than one person glancing toward our booth with expressions that ranged from curiosity to genuine remorse. The woman with the Hermes purse had actually gotten up and left, her dinner unfinished, her face red with what I hoped was shame. I stayed with Charlie, sitting beside him in the booth while he nursed his hot chocolate with both hands wrapped around the mug, like it was the most precious thing in the world. He had stopped crying, but his eyes were red and puffy, and he looked so incredibly tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying burdens too heavy for small shoulders. He told me about his dad in fragments, pieces of a story that broke my heart with every word. How James had been raising him alone since his mother's death, working multiple jobs to keep them afloat. How his dad had been too proud to reach out to Richard for help, too convinced that he had burned that bridge beyond repair. How the medical bills from his dad's cancer treatment had drained everything they had, leaving them with nothing. How they had been living in their car for the past 2 months, which explained the dirt and the smell, and the state of Charlie's clothes. "My dad didn't want me to come here," Charlie said quietly, staring into his hot chocolate. "He said he didn't deserve Mr. Beaumont's help after how things ended between them. But when he got really sick, when the doctor said there wasn't anything more they could do, he changed his mind. He said some things are more important than pride. He said making sure I was safe was more important than his ego." I had to ask, even though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "Charlie, how did you get so dirty? Where were you before you came here?" He looked down at his hands, at the grime under his fingernails. "There was a really bad storm last night," he said. "The place where we usually park, under the overpass, it flooded. Dad was already too sick to help, and I tried to save our stuff, but the water came so fast. Everything got washed away, everything except this." He touched the pocket where he had put the check, now safely tucked away again. "Dad kept this in a waterproof bag. He said it was the most important thing we owned, more important than anything else. When I woke up this morning, Dad was so much worse, he could barely talk. An ambulance came and took him to the hospital, and he made me promise, made me swear that I would come here today, right now, no matter what. So I did. I walked here because I didn't have money for the subway. It took me almost 5 hours. Before I could respond, before I could tell this incredibly brave child how remarkable he was, the front door of the restaurant opened, and Richard Beaumont walked in. I had seen Mr. Beaumont hundreds of times over the years, always impeccably dressed, always composed, always the picture of controlled elegance and authority. But the man who walked through that door was someone I barely recognized. His hair was disheveled like he had been running his hands through it. His usually perfectly knotted tie was loose and askew, and his face was a landscape of raw emotion, fear, hope, grief, and something that looked like desperate love all fighting for dominance. His eyes scanned the room frantically until they landed on our booth, on Charlie, and then something in him seemed to break and mend all at once. "Charlie," he breathed, and the way he said that name with such infinite tenderness and pain told me everything I needed to know about the truth of their relationship. This wasn't just his best friend's son. This was a child he loved, had always loved, from afar and in secret, unable to be part of his life because of pride and stubbornness and circumstances I couldn't begin to understand. Charlie slid out of the booth and stood there, suddenly seeming uncertain again. This small, dirty, exhausted child facing the impeccably dressed owner of one of New York's finest restaurants. "Uncle Richard?" he said, his voice small and wavering. I'm sorry I'm so dirty. I tried to clean up a little in the bathroom at the gas station, but it didn't really work, and I didn't want to come here like this, but Dad said I had to come today. He said I couldn't wait, and I didn't know what else to do. The words came tumbling out faster and faster until Richard closed the distance between them in 3 long strides and dropped to his knees, pulling Charlie into his arms with a fierceness that made several people in the restaurant gasp. It didn't matter that Charlie was filthy. It didn't matter that dirt and who knows what else was transferring onto Richard's $1,000 suit. All that mattered was this embrace, this moment of connection between a man and a child who loved each other despite years of forced separation. I'm sorry, Richard was saying over and over, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Charlie. I should have been there. I should have found a way. I should have put aside my pride in your father's and just been there for both of you. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Charlie was crying again, but differently this time. These weren't tears of fear or desperation. These were tears of relief, of finally finding safety after being alone and scared for so long. He's dying. Charlie sobbed into Richard's shoulder. Dad is dying, Uncle Richard. He said to tell you he's sorry too. He said to tell you he never stopped thinking of you as his brother. He said the fight was stupid and he wished he could take it all back. He said to tell you that he loves you and always did, and that taking care of me would be the greatest gift you could ever give him. I watched as Richard Beaumont, this powerful, wealthy, influential man, wept openly in the middle of his own restaurant, clinging to a dirty child like he was the most precious thing in the world. And in that moment, he was. Everything else, all the money and prestige and success, it meant nothing compared to this. To love, to family, to the chance to make things right. Eventually, Richard pulled back just enough to look at Charlie's face, his hands coming up to gently cup the boy's cheeks. Where is your father now? Which hospital? Charlie named a hospital in Brooklyn, one of the public facilities that took uninsured patients. Richard's face tightened with pain and determination. We're going to see him right now, he said firmly. Right now, Charlie, you and me together. I have a car waiting outside. We're going to go see your dad, and we're going to tell him that you're safe, that I've got you, that I'm never letting you go. Does that sound okay? Charlie nodded frantically, hope blazing in his eyes so bright it was almost painful to witness. As they stood to leave, Richard finally seemed to remember where he was, that they were in the middle of his restaurant surrounded by staff and customers who had witnessed this entire extraordinary scene. His eyes swept across the room, and I saw something hard and cold enter his expression as he took in the faces of the guests, many of whom quickly looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I'll be addressing what happened here tonight, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the dining room. Every single person who showed cruelty to this child, who laughed at him, who wanted him thrown out like garbage, you showed me exactly who you are. And I remember everything. Then his eyes landed on me, and his expression softened. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for being kind when kindness was needed. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in. Charlie told me you were nice to him, that you were the only one who treated him like he mattered. I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, extracting several bills and handing them to Marcus, who still looked like he might be sick. Close the restaurant for the rest of the evening, Richard instructed. Send everyone home with pay. Cancel all reservations and refund deposits. And Marcus? The maitre d' looked up with fearful eyes. We'll be having a very serious conversation about tonight when I return. About judgment, about compassion, and about who we choose to be when we think no one important is watching. With that, Richard took Charlie's hand, and they walked toward the door together. But just before they left, Charlie turned back and looked at me. Thank you, he said softly. Thank you for being nice when everyone else was mean. You made me feel like maybe I wasn't so dirty after all. I watched them leave. Watched Richard carefully help Charlie into the back of a waiting town car. Watched as the vehicle pulled away into the rainy New York night, carrying them toward a hospital bed where a dying man would learn that his son was safe, that his brother had forgiven him, that love had won after all. The restaurant erupted into noise the moment they were gone, everyone talking at once, processing what had just happened, what they had witnessed. But I just stood there in silence thinking about how close we had come to failing that child, how easily we could have turned him away, how our prejudice and assumptions had nearly destroyed something precious and irreplaceable. That night changed everything at Le Jardin Doré. Richard did return 3 days later, with Charlie by his side. Charlie was clean now, wearing new clothes that actually fit, his hair freshly cut, looking like any other happy child except for the sadness that lingered in his eyes. James had passed away the night after Charlie found Richard, but he had lived long enough to see them reunited, to know that his son would be cared for, to make peace with his oldest friend and brother. Richard announced that Charlie was his son now, officially through the adoption papers he had already started filing, but more importantly, through the bonds of love that had always existed between them. He implemented new policies at the restaurant, training sessions on dignity and respect, requirements that all staff treat every person who walked through the doors with kindness regardless of their appearance. He created a fund in James's memory to help families struggling with medical debt and homelessness, turning his grief into action that would help others in similar situations. Marcus was demoted, though not fired, and spent months working his way back up, learning lessons about humanity that should never have needed teaching. Several of our regular customers never came back, unable to face their own shame, and honestly, we were better off without them. And me? I think about that night every single day. I think about how easily I could have stayed silent, how I could have let them throw Charlie out, how I almost let my job and my fear of conflict override my basic human decency. I think about all the other times in my life when I've judged someone based on how they looked, what they wore, how they spoke. I think about all the Charlies in the world, the people who are struggling and suffering and just trying to survive, who are dismissed and dehumanized because they don't meet society's standards of respectability. This experience taught me that every single person who crosses your path is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying burdens you can't see, deserving of basic kindness and dignity regardless of their circumstances. It taught me that a child's worth isn't determined by the cleanliness of his clothes or the dirt on his hands, but by the courage in his heart and the love he carries for his family. It taught me that the things we think are important, the money and status and appearance, they mean nothing, absolutely nothing compared to compassion and connection and being there for each other when it matters most. So I want to ask you, have you ever judged someone based on their appearance only to discover you were completely wrong? Have you ever witnessed or experienced prejudice that made you see the world differently? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below because I think we all need to be reminded sometimes that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own biases and assumptions, please leave a like. It helps more people see this message, and honestly, I think it's a message our world desperately needs right now. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real human experiences that challenge us to be better, kinder, more compassionate people, please subscribe to Through My Eyes and hit that notification bell. This channel is all about seeing the world through different perspectives, understanding experiences that aren't our own, and recognizing the common humanity that connects us all. Charlie is 15 now, happy and thriving, excelling in school and talking about maybe becoming a doctor someday so he can help people the way the doctors tried to help his dad. Richard is the father he always deserved, and watching them together, you'd never know they weren't related by blood. They visit James's grave together every week, and Charlie says he tells his dad about everything that's happening in his life. All the good things that came from that rainy night when a dirty kid walked into a fancy restaurant and changed everything. The signature on that check, Richard's signature promising to care for James's son, turned out to be more than just a financial guarantee. It was a promise of love, of family, of never giving up on the people who matter. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Charlie had gone to a different restaurant, if he had encountered people who turned him away without that check ever being seen, if he had been lost in a system that doesn't care much for children who fall through the cracks. The thought keeps me awake sometimes. But then I remember that he came to us, that despite everything, love and loyalty and brotherhood won out in the end, and that one moment of choosing kindness can change absolutely everything. So the next time you see someone who doesn't fit your expectations, who looks different or smells different or seems out of place, I hope you'll remember Charlie. I hope you'll remember that behind every appearance is a story, behind every struggle is a human being deserving of dignity, and that the most important signature we can leave on this world isn't written with a pen, but with our actions, our choices, and our willingness to see each other as we truly are, beautifully, messily, perfectly human.